Welcome to the Allison Loves Math podcast. I'm super excited to introduce today's guest, Nicole Santamaria. She's a bilingual occupational therapist and the founder of OT for Real Life, aka Miami Handwriting, with programs for developing handwriting and executive functioning skills in Miami, Florida, and virtually. She's an expert in task analysis and occupational performance. Her mission is to guide families to help their children develop real-life strategies for success in life and school. You can find out more about her at miamihandwriting.net/podcast. And today we are here, of course, to talk about math and to talk about why kids get stuck in math and what we can do to help. So welcome, Nicole. I am super excited to have you here today.
Hi, Allison. Thanks so much for having me. I love chatting with you, and I'm happy that we're going to be able to talk about math and occupational therapy and how those two can kind of help each other out in school.
Yes, I know. I'm so excited too. So let's just jump in. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you help kids with math?
Sure. So I'm based out of Miami, Florida. And for the past, time goes so fast, probably like already 7 to 8 years, I've been embedded in the school system, in the charter school system here. So when they call OT to come aboard and, join the IEP team here in Florida, occupational therapy is a related service, which means we support the teachers and the IEP goals that are there. We don't have our own goals. So you wonder, what does occupational therapy have to do in a math class, right?
Yes.
So, right? What does that have to do with anything? But it actually, if we're true to our role as a school occupational therapist in Florida by the Florida guidelines, especially by the Dade County guidelines, our job is to make sure that the student functions throughout anything having to do with school so that they can access their education. So that means transitioning in the hallway. That means going to the cafeteria and being able to get their lunch tray. It means copying from the board. It means being able to have their school supplies so they can get what they need from school to home. Here in Florida, we've been in person since the beginning of the school year. Some people are still virtual. So even what does it look like virtually? Are the kids able to log on independently? Are they able to turn in their assignments? And in the math class, we kind of look at you mentioned task analysis and occupational performance. So we really take those skills, which task analysis is what I always say is the occupational therapy superpowers, because it's the only profession I know that we take the big giant task, I don't know, let's say, copying homework from the board, and we're able to chop it down to meet the child where they're at and then fill in the gap with, okay, here's where we are and here's what they need to support them so that they can copy the homework down properly. So the same applies for the math classroom. They still need all of those skills that they need in their English class and their writing class, which is where people really look for an occupational therapist. All those skills are embedded throughout their whole school day. So in the math classroom, it looks like they have difficulty copying the lessons from the board, especially if they're older. There's so much information that a teacher gives out during her lesson. And if there's a processing delay, if there's a motor skills delay, if there's even a small visual motor skills delay, it's really hard to copy all that information for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the multisensory approach that they use even for the little ones becomes difficult. Like the manipulatives, even though now what I've seen is that everybody has their own bag of manipulatives because there's not a lot of sharing class materials. So if you've got a little one that has, any attention issues, any coordination, any struggles with organization, those manipulatives that are so good for child A are a disaster for child B. So I guess it just goes back into, making sure that each child is supported with what they need. And, that's where the OT comes in. That's where the IEP comes in. That's where the accommodations come in so that child B is at the same level as child A.
Right. Awesome.
Oof.
I know. There are so many things. I know there are so many ways that all of these skills can affect math. So let's can we run through like some of the solutions? Like what are
Break
some of
it
the things that
down.
you do to help kids who struggle with these things?
Sure. And then I'd also like to hear, you were a teacher in the classroom. So it's always great to hear, like, at least here in Florida, and I know
Yeah,
different parts of the country are different. Most children are all in this general ed classroom.
right.
So you have a
Okay.
general ed teacher supporting all kinds of children's, those that have an IEP and those that don't have an IEP. And I always like to get feedback from teachers as to, wow, it was really hard for me to know what to do with this one group of teacher, because there's not a lot of, with this one group of students, because there's not that much information resources out there. As me as a general ed teacher, how do I support my students that have an IEP or an educational plan? So you can
Right,
just jump
right.
in with that.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Any examples you remember, those are always good to.
so I teach at a community college, and I think where this sort of comes in is I have, students who come in with what is the word? What is the word where you get like extra time on exams?
Time.
You can have somebody, you can qualify for somebody to take notes for you in class,
Yes, it's an accessibility office.
Yes. And
Student
so,
accessibility, something like that. Yeah.
right.
Because it goes through the universities. If the kids have these accommodations, it goes with them all the way. And actually, I hear in the universities, they get a lot.
Yeah, so it's really good. So for me, I feel like it's super helpful when students have already figured out what accommodations they need by the time they get to college, because then they can come into class, and they can say like, look, I need to go and take the test elsewhere, so that way I can get double time, or we can set up on the first day of school them, taking notes for them and stuff. I think where it gets difficult, right, is when students have gotten all the way to college and we find out throughout the class that they need and probably would have qualified for extra time, but they just didn't realize it. And then it's not until later in the semester, like after they've failed a couple of exams and after like we've been working, that we realize that there's something else going on. And if it were like a different scenario, they would have been set up for success. But because we're just flying through, all of the material sort of for the general class, we just didn't figure it out early enough. Does that make sense? So I think that's sort of my two experiences, and why I'm so interested in the subject, because I feel like just the more that I learn, I don't really have, I don't know, I feel like I'm just still learning what all of the different things are that students struggle with and what it is that we can provide them. Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah,
it's sounding super articulate talking about it.
That's the feedback I hear from teachers. Like, Nicole, just tell us what we can do, because we don't know. We want to help and we want to, but
yeah, because sometimes it's like you're sitting there with a student and I'm just sort of like, gosh, I wish that I had, a little more tools in my back pocket that I can just sort of, list of things to do to help that I could run through, because I've got my list, but I'm always looking to expand it,
Okay, so let's get to it. And I'm going to add advocating onto the list of the things that the OT do. We teach the kids to start advocating for themselves, because everybody loves coming to the OT. We're like safe and friendly, and we don't have a sad face, happy face chart. So
and I feel sometimes like that's part of the struggle with math, is that students don't always feel comfortable coming to their math teachers, and that's why anyways. That's why it gets delayed sometimes.
And also it's the advocating piece. Like, parents and families don't know that they take these accommodations with them through university level.
Right.
And if the kids haven't really been using them and or advocating for themselves in the, middle school, high school level, they're going to get to college and they're going to be like, they're not going to listen. They're not going to give me extra time. Nobody cares if I need extra notes, or, because it's college and I'm supposed to be super student and know how to do everything. So, okay, so let's go through some of the, I guess, the struggles that an occupational therapy would come in and help with. And Allison and I talked about this before we started recording. We want to talk about the problems, and we might be going a little too fast, because we're doing that on purpose, because we want to be able to spend time talking about solutions, and so that you walk away with some really like, how do I say, concrete things that you can actually embed in your classroom.
Yes.
If you've got your kids at home, you can do with them at home. That really, I'm hoping, make a big difference. A lot of these are things that I do with the teachers, and I have some specific memories specific to math. So we're going to go through the problem list really fast, and kind of down and dirty, and then we'll unpack the solutions, right? Okay, so I have a list. Go through them here. So one of the main things that embed like all the skills that the kids do in school are executive functioning skills. Those are like the thinking and doing skills. And it's really hard to pick one apart from the other. But as far as thinking and doing skills that directly relate to math, we're going to be looking at working memory, right? So much memory is needed for the math facts, addition facts, subtraction facts, multiplication, division. And if you have working memory struggles, those math facts, the fluencies, are going to struggle as well. Yes. Attention, right? Ooh, so go ahead.
As we go through them, let's do like an action step for each. Sure. So working memory, what is something that teachers or parents can do to help their child?
Okay, got you. We're going to do it this way. Okay, perfect.
I know. I was thinking go through the list, but then as we were talking about it, I was like, oh, let's
do it now.
I want to jump to the solution or a solution. I know there's not like one universal.
So one of the things that I'm going to try and just stick to like one or two recommendations.
Perfect.
Especially for math, there's so much explaining that has to be done, right? So some of the kids with working memory, attention, flexibility have a hard time taking what you said and putting it on paper.
Yeah.
Even if, because the teachers will tell me, I have it written exactly on the board and they still can't copy it. Again, a lot of these kids, it's so hard to combine all the pieces that you need to copy notes properly. This is probably more for like the middle school, high school student.
No, I see it at community college too.
Oh, and yeah, college.
Absolutely. it carries over if it's
not so much for the little ones, really, because a lot of the little ones are not taking that many notes. That one of the best ways to hack that is let's just give them the notes. You're giving it to them anyways. This is a math class. This is not a class on how to take notes. If we were doing a class on how to take notes, we would scale it appropriately. This is a math class. We want them to have the information because we want them to use it as a resource. We want them to study from it. So number one, let's give them the math notes. Number two, let's give them fill in. This is my favorite one for all the kids when it comes to note taking. Let's give them the notes, but that they have to fill in the blanks, right? Because we do know if you gave it to me, I don't really have to pay attention to what you're saying because I already have it. But if I do a fill in the blanks, then I can still pay attention to you. I don't have to keep all of this in my short-term memory, and I can fill in the blanks. And I am the occupational therapist, so you know that handwriting connection is almost like cheating because it just dumps the information into your memory bank when you write it out by hand. So we don't want to take that away from them by giving them all the notes.
Right. No, I think that is super helpful. I did notice, because I teach a lot of sort of remedial math classes where, I'll have an entire class of students who aren't great at taking notes. And the fill in the blank notes can be a game changer because I found that there are some students who, whether it's just the handwriting or the working memory issues or, whatever the reasons are.
No, you're right. The motor skills, if their handwriting is off too.
Exactly. And the fill in the blank notes actually got students to go from no notes whatsoever, like they just sort of had given up trying taking notes in math to actually doing it. And I found that it also helps with them focusing on the most important point, right? So it's just sort of like the problem is there already in the notes. So you don't have to worry about them copying it down wrong and then working on the wrong problem, which, oh my gosh, is so frustrating, right? Because you're just like,
when they copy it down wrong or they copy that one decimal place is off. What is that? That is not measuring how you know math. Let's just
right. And then it's sort of like we get to just work on their portion of the work, right? So if the problem's there, then they're working on showing their work, right? Which is what they need to do during the test, and whether or not they're making mistakes, showing their work, which is what they have to do on the test. And it eliminates, a few of those problems that prevent them from even getting to the point where they're working on the problem. Does that make sense?
Yes,
so
because
I love that idea.
In your bucket, in your thinking and doing bucket, you only have so much, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
if I use all of my thinking and doing, my executive functioning skills bucket, and
Yeah.
my vision and my motor skills bucket, and all that to copy the note, I don't have anything left to actually learn and work out the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's just remove that. And a lot of the things that we do for the kids that, you know, have an IEP, they benefit the whole class.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Mhm.
Like if I'm making fill in the blank notes for one student, I'm just gonna do it for all the students.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
just, right? So then that one kid doesn't feel bad that he's the only one with these special notes.
Oh, yeah.
And let's just do it for everybody because it benefits. These are all strategies that help the entire class, not just the kids that need
Yes, that is such a good point, because I think that was how I started doing the fill in the blank notes. It was because one student needed it, you know, or we just sort of felt like that was the right solution. So we decided to try it out, and it benefited so many students in the class, you know, so that's a great idea.
Yay!
Awesome.
We could end the episode right now. This is just
all right, cool. So next part, we're good with working memory. What's next?
Working memory. Okay, so attention. So for attention, we want to make sure that you remember we have a bucket. We only have so much attention in our bucket. And now after 2020, we have less attention in that bucket than ever. I'm like, what?
So for like attention, I don't know. 2020 has it's been too much on the attention part. I put the bread in the refrigerator the other day, and I'm just sort of like, I can't remember.
I can't.
I'm messing up the most basic things at this point. It's just been too much stuff in 2020. Sorry. Side note. Stuff I probably shouldn't share.
It's fine. We can agree. Okay, so let's take we know that attention works well with multisensory input. So we know, and obviously we can't do this in a classroom, but you know, some people work really well listening to background music. So that is multisensory. You're having the task you're working on plus the music coming in to help you engage and pay attention. So some classrooms have I walked into classrooms and they'll have like soft classical music in the background, but you know, that'll work for me, but it may drive you insane. So it's hard to do that in a classroom, but what multisensory can we bring into our teaching to keep attention, right? So we can break it down, make the steps very explicit. Let's not assume that they're going to understand the instructions, right? Like let's make it step 1, step 2, step 3 every time. Let's bring in what we know with flexible seating, right? Like I can't keep still when I'm doing these things. Like I have like a bungee chair and it swivels, and I just do it without even thinking about it. So I have to consciously think, stop moving around so much because you look like a crazy person. But let's incorporate that. Let's if they need to stand up in the back of the classroom, let's let them stand up in the back of the classroom. You know, we know so much. You know, sitting is the new smoking, right? So I don't know if that's true, but I've just heard it.
I like that.
But yeah, like my little friend that's been on Zoom like this, sitting down for a whole year with a blanket on, you know, I need him to move. Like that's what I do in my session. I have him stand up but having the kids move while they're listening to you, let's just let them be. You know, some schools allow flexible seating. They have like wiggle cushions and stuff like that. So let's bring that into, and if you were at the university level, so, you know, like they can chew gum probably. They can do more, you know, they have more things that they can do then.
Right.
Than the younger students. So those are the things that I find, and you know, they all work in unison, those 3, the working memory, the flexibility, and the attention. So let's jump into flexibility. So the flexibility, it becomes an issue because they hear the problem. These are the kids that you went over 1 apple and 2 apples is 3 apples. And then on the test, you gave them 2 bananas and 1 apple. And they're like, what? You're mixing the apples with the bananas? Like, no, you know, like they have a hard time going from, I like to call it from plan A to plan B.
Yes.
Right. So let's incorporate plan A and plan B in the examples that you give them. Right. So you might not need to do that with all the class. Like you might not, but in your examples, always include plan A and plan B so that they see it's the same problem with different scenarios.
Right.
Does that
Right.
make sense? And the other thing I'm going to add to the flexibility piece is let's add the same problem, but at like easy level and hard level.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because like
Yeah.
1 + 1 is 2, but now we have 10 + 11. What? And then sometimes, a lot of times that's what happens. Like the teacher will go over some of the easy problems and then the harder ones will come out on the test.
Right.
And
Right.
we didn't practice these kind of problems. We practiced these. And I mean, you let me know if you agree or disagree. Like with math, the secret is fluency, right? Like I know when I've done all my research on homework, the only homework that's actually valuable is math fluency, like the math facts over and over. And because the more math you do, the better your brain is going to get at figuring out how to solve the problems.
Right. Right.
So, and reading too, but I know for math, different problems was a very beneficial.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm thinking about this in terms of my statistics class. Okay. Because in statistics, right, I see students who struggle with this, right? The apples versus the bananas, right? But it's on such a simple level, right? But then when we get those students into statistics, the trouble with statistics is that at a certain point, everything's a word problem, right? Mm-hmm. And every word problem is different. So I as a teacher can see how like, look, it's the same word problem, right? We just input a different scenario. But I feel like there's some students who, it goes from apples to bananas and they're like, it's a whole new topic, but it's 1,000, right? There's 1,000 different scenarios that you could use for that one word problem. Like, do you have suggestions for
the word problem? I have a little note here and word problems, and it was just like question mark.
Which I think is why some students struggle so much with statistics in particular, because one, it's different than the algebra classes that they've taken for so long, you know.
Interesting. My kids do better with the statistics than the
really interesting.
Like my biological, like statistics ends up being the class. Like I don't know what's that a high math that you have to take. I'm drawing a blank. Not physics. That's science. Calculus.
Calculus.
Yeah, they always opt for the statistics class instead of the calculus class because it's easier. For word problems, the strategies that I use are the same strategies I would use for the kids that have a hard time reading a paragraph, right? Like, what do we tell them? We tell them to pull the context clues out of it. Pull, like if it's you're adding, pull if this, break it down. But my kids that I work with that either have the thinking and doing struggles, or they have processing struggles, or vision, or motor skill struggle, they cannot break those word problems apart independently. So almost breaking it down for them. Obviously, how do you do that on a test? I don't know. But at least having them practice breaking it down. I see them. They just, they can't, you know how like sometimes the instructions will be like, okay, circle if they have to add, and then underline if you have to subtract. That's way too many steps for a lot of the kids to do. So if we actually took the part of the word problem where it's talking about addition and literally like, you know, took the whole text and separated it, chunk here, the part where now you're subtracting, and then you separate it here. So they see, again, using the multisensory, they actually see that it's separated.
Right.
So they're processing one thing at a time. One cool idea, this is probably, you know, more feasible for the younger kids, is you actually, you know, print it out and you cut it. And then you actually have them take the big piece, you know, like, okay, in this word problem, which sentences tell you have to, you know, put a plus sign, and they actually physically can move it so that, again, they're embedding that multisensory approach into the math problem because they're physically taking it. Because I'll tell you, all that circling and highlighting, and it's a great, like, I love it because I can use like all the different, but for a lot of the kids, it's just way too many steps. Like we're adding 6 extra steps for them to get to the solution.
Right. Oh, well, yeah. And that's the problem. I think that so I'm writing this book on hypothesis testing, which is sort of a large concept in the statistics classes. And what's difficult about it, right, is that, my co-author and I, we've broken it down into 5 steps, right? But each of those 5 steps has like 5 of its own steps. Right. So it's like, so what students struggle with is the fact that like it's one word problem, but there's like 25 different steps that have to happen in it. And so I love what you're saying actually about breaking up the word problem itself, because we've broken it up into steps, but I do like the idea of just visually separating out aspects of the problem, because it reminds me of, back when I did like SAT and ACT tutoring when I was younger, that was something that I would have students do, literally like cover up part of the problem because it's just too much to focus on all at once. And so I think that's actually a really good suggestion that I've never heard of before for statistics. So thank you.
Oh, good. Let me know how it works.
I totally will. Yeah.
Yeah. So that brings us to more of like the classic like OT, when we get called in. So we'll jump right into like vision. If they have any visual processing, any visual motor skills. So real quick, visual processing is how the eyes interpret the information. It has nothing to do with seeing 20/20, has nothing to do with glasses, contact lenses. It's more like the figure ground, the depth perception, the form consistency, how your eyes use the information that they see. Yeah. And then the visual motor skills, I always like to say, it's like your eyes and your hands go on a play date together. So if there's a struggle with either of those, and again, there's never just one struggle, everything's layered in. I will tell you that reading a page of, when they're practicing like around the 3rd grade, 4th grade, that they're practicing division fluency and then multiplication fluency, and you give one of these kids a page with 100 multiplication problems, no, they just can't. It's too many things on a paper. Even like sometimes the tests, they'll try and cram as many problems into one sheet. So you'll have like 13 problems in one piece of paper, and then you tell the student to work it out on a separate piece of paper. So that brings up two problems. Number one, there's way too many things going on that page. Yeah. So you can call it sensory overload, you can call it visual overload, we can call it attention. The result is that they are just lost with all the stuff in the paper. And now you've asked them to work it out, because you're not going to grade it unless it's worked out, which I agree. But now I have to go and get another piece of paper. I have to initiate getting another piece of paper when I'm already like overwhelmed with all of these things on this one paper. So this is what you were saying with your ACT practice, like just the fact of taking one problem and leaving a big chunk of space underneath and saying, this is the problem, large font, the works, everything. And this space underneath must have your work. Let's make it like super easy for them. That's like, one of the things that I wrote here for one of my notes is you want it to be specific and explicit. Like, let's make it specific, explicit, detailed, and real easy for these guys to do. And again, this helps all of the students.
It does.
Like, how great is it for me? Like, I don't have to go get a piece of paper, like it's here. Okay, great. And
I feel like, going back to sort of what you were saying before, it can help the whole class. That was one of the things that I found, because I had a student one time who, exactly what you just said, right? Just,
happens a lot.
And part of what he struggled with was the writing, right? And so he had to write very large, and so literally I just redid the test, right? And you made it exactly one problem per page. And so that way all the work could be right there. We disregarded the Scantron, right, for multiple choice stuff, because again, that's going to somewhere else on a different page. Right? So, the worst possible scenario, right, is where you have a test with tons of little questions on it. You have to do your work on a separate page, and then you have to fill in a Scantron on a 3rd page, right? So if you do it all on one page, it's great. But again, to what you had said earlier, it actually helped a lot of other students. If you're making it for one student, it's easy enough to print it off for whoever wants it. And so I just put it out as an option. And there were so many students who opted for that and really liked just having one problem per page. as much room as you'd like. And they showed their work more because there was just more space available. They didn't have to be like stingy with like how they were writing their stuff out. So
yeah, definitely. And I feel like that would solve so many problems in the school system if we embedded, I guess, back in the old days, these were called like special ed strategies. I don't know what they're called today.
Right.
Special ed the window, but if we would embed these strategies that help struggling children or children that have AP, all of us would be better because remember, like, executive functioning skills, all of these skills that we're talking about are skills that are developing in all of the kids. Like our motor skills are developing. Our fine motor skills are still developing. Just because I'm not 5 doesn't mean I'm not getting better at all of these skills.
Right.
So it would just kind of remove all of the stuff and the kids can actually focus on the content.
Right.
What it is. And now with like the Google Classroom and stuff, it's a little bit different because how do we, it's just added. But I feel like we can still, again, as long as we're specific, I've seen the classrooms that are specific and explicit and very detailed as to the instructions. Like, for example, I can be like, oh, I tell them all the time to show their work on extra paper. Okay, right. So, okay. However, I pass out, like, these are the two differences. Like, it's kind of annoying, but it's true. I actually pass out 3 blank sheets of papers with lines divided, labeled 1, each chunk has, the same, let's say there's 6 problems labeled 1 through 6. Show your work here.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody gets this packet.
Right.
So that's what I mean by specific, explicit, and detailed.
Yes.
Because, all right, I have a person who's struggling in my class. And now because he's struggling, I've asked them to do something extra that the rest of the class doesn't have to do. So I'm already taking from their cup by saying, oh, you remember to get a piece of paper to work it out because everybody else can do it on the side because their handwriting is legible. So that's not leveling out the playing field. Like there's these things that we can do that will level out the playing field. And I know teachers have so many things especially this school year and now with their contact tracing but these are just things that, like, the goal here is to give you things that will help in your classroom, not overwhelm or make it harder or more complicated. So
yeah, definitely. And I would add, I guess, just I think especially for like the fill-in notes, right, and being explicit and stuff like that. So if you're a teacher who hasn't done that before, from my experience, my recommendation is just to give it a shot and know that like you won't necessarily get it right the first time, because I feel like as I've started doing the fill in the notes, I definitely had some times, especially early on, where I totally botched it up, right? That what I thought was explicit wasn't, but you learn from that. And then the next time you get better, or like what I thought was the appropriate amount of space on an area for notes wasn't, but there's no way to like get to the better second version of that unless you try it the first time, and I think you learn so much from doing it. So I don't know. I feel like, at the beginning it was a little time consuming, right? And then also just sort of nerve wracking because you get that feedback and you're like, oh God, I spent time on this and it wasn't helpful. But remember, it's something that you can use on your next class, right? And so it's like, oh God, the second semester I taught that class, it saved me so much time, because the notes were essentially already there. And I just had to, after each class, I would just make notes on what would I change for next time. And then, hit enter a couple more times so that there's more space on this, and change a little bit of wording on something else. So, I know like a lot of things when we're doing something new, it's hard because it takes more time, but it can be so helpful. And I don't know, one of those things where I feel like that's worth trying out for sure.
Definitely. I have a student who just recently had an open book test. He got an F because they didn't take
back and forth.
They didn't take notes. So yeah, so I feel like this should almost be almost on like some of the kids' IEPs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and one little hack for that is, again, depending on who you are. Like, I know sometimes teachers have like kids who'll volunteer and like help them grade papers or help them, do stuff in the classroom. If you could get that student that's really good at taking notes during your class and have them make a Google Doc of their notes, then you already have some of the work taken out. You can even have the students, for extra credit, make a Google Doc out of the notes, and then you can use it to they're relearning their notes, and then you will have some Google Docs that you can use for the other students.
Right. Oh my goodness. So I just realized we're super out of time.
We are right on time. It's perfect. We've gone over thinking and doing skills. We went over visual motor skills. I do just want to jump in on the legibility, because I do a lot of work with handwriting, and numbers always come up. So let's finish it up with legibility of numbers, because that's one of the big things that OTs come in for in the math classroom. So legible numbers are made out of writing them accurately, and then writing them fluently. So what I like to recommend to teachers is, don't be afraid to embed how to write numbers in your math class. Like, again, starting off with the younger kids. First of all, half the kids skip handwriting instruction altogether. So don't be afraid to embed that in your class. And again, we want to be specific. The number starts here, big line down, however you want to do it. And it doesn't have to be this big fancy lesson that you do one day. Just sneak it in throughout your lessons, and the kids will get it. The second piece, which comes from that, so we have the accuracy piece. So embed that into your lessons, into your math time. And the speed, right? Because sometimes they can write it nice and legible, but it takes them forever. So when we're doing the math fluency, like the multiplications and all of those, we want to have their numbers legible and fluent before we get to that part. So don't be afraid to, again, with very specific and explicit instructions, to incorporate the speed of how to write the numbers, because that's the way the kids are going to be successful. And that's a missing piece from a lot of the handwriting, is the accuracy and the speed. And that's what we need to have, the fluent numbers, so that they can go through the speed drill, so they can work out the complicated math problem, and still keep it readable and legible.
Yeah, no, it's so true, because especially when you get to the more complicated problems, right? I always look at students they need to know that addition and subtraction, multiplication fluently, right? So that way they're not getting stuck thinking about like what 3 times 4 is. And then the same thing then with the handwriting, it's like, you also don't want them stuck on like, how do you write the 3, right? And then what is 3 times 4? And then it's like, if you're stuck on those 2 things, gosh, actually looking at a larger problem is just impossible at that point,
And you'll have the kids that will do the reversals of the numbers, and they'll reverse, like, instead of 14, it'll be 41. So a lot of that can be removed if we start with the instructions, detailed, specific instruction. And it doesn't have to be a fancy handwriting class. Like, actually, like, no, I prefer that it's embedded in science and math, in vocabulary, so that they can actually get like a real use out of it. So it needs to be specific as to what they have to do, and it needs to be practiced, but it needs to be practiced correctly. Because a lot of the time we give our kids practice, and they wrote 10 number 5s, and all 10 number 5s are wrong. So so the way to hack that is, you say, I want you to write 5 number 5s. Sometimes the kids will write the first number 5, and then they'll write the second one, and then 3 to 20 is just all wrong. It gets progressively worse. Giving them a specific amount that you want to write actually does help with that.
Yeah. Oh, that's great advice. I love it.
So yeah.
Awesome. So, okay, before we go, can you tell us, I guess, again, a little bit about your business and where people can get in touch with you if they want to follow up with you?
Sure. So you can find me at the podcast page is miamihandwriting.net/podcast. My website is OT for Real Life. And on there, I have tons of handwriting resources. I have a handwriting course, which actually I'm going to be adding a numbers piece to the handwriting course because currently I don't, but I get a lot of requests for the numbers piece. So I'm going to be adding that onto it. And I have executive functioning workshops for parents and an executive functioning membership that just opened for parents. So in there we'll have workshops, we'll have Q&As, we can have problem solving, and I can kind of help support you. And executive functioning is never just like, unfortunately, it's not a quick fix. So the best way for parents is to have this continuous support. And if you're in Miami, and actually online too, I do executive functioning coaching as well. And I do regular OT stuff, which incorporates all the things we talk about. So all the things.
Awesome. All the things. I love it so much. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being here, Nicole. This was really fascinating and educational. And I feel like I learned so much, and I appreciate so much this chance to get to interview you today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And yeah, I felt I learned so much from this too. I love doing this.
It was so much fun.
It was good to get a view as to what the community college experience looks like, because I feel nobody talks about that.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about it.
Yeah,
a lot, but no, I do appreciate it. And it is fun to see, so much of what we do at the earlier grade levels, affects what we do in college, or where students are at when they enter. So it's all super interesting, and it's all connected,
Yeah, all of it.
Awesome.
All right, great. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you so much. And if you're listening today, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next interview. Bye.